Peter B. Collins News and Comment. It's Tuesday, September 3rd, 2019. I hope you had a great Labor Day weekend, and that even applies to people along the southeast coast of the United States, still hunkered down, waiting to see what Hurricane Dorian will do. And we begin our podcast today with a story that we first broke here in our News and Comment podcast on Friday. The revelations by New York-based transparency activist, he's an anti-surveillance expert, attorney Albert Fox Cahn, who joined us for an in-depth interview today. He's the executive director of the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project at the Urban Justice Center in New York. And he broke the story Friday about the use of so-called reverse search warrants by the Manhattan District Attorney in attempting to locate members of Antifa who were victims of an altercation with the right-wing Proud Boys. That was a year ago in October. Well, as they were approaching trial, the DA demanded that Google hand over account information for all electronic devices that were used in parts of the Upper East Side on that particular night. Now, this search did not produce any useful results for the DA. But it's another damaging incursion into our Fourth Amendment rights. And Albert Fox Cahn enumerates the origin of the Fourth Amendment and why the reverse search warrants appear to be unconstitutional.
The reason we have a Fourth Amendment is because at the founding of this country, we had general warrants that allowed British law enforcement to go into any home, search any place, take any paper, seize anything they wanted. And that's why we have this in the Fourth Amendment as one of the most fundamental safeguards against the power of the state. Mm-hmm. But with this attack on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, where a number of Antifa members were attacked by the Proud Boys, as part of the case targeting the Proud Boys, the prosecutor here in Manhattan decided to use a reverse search warrant to target members of Antifa because they couldn't find the victims of the attack. And so keep that in mind. This is a tool that we're using to find the victims of a crime. And what they did is they said to Google, we want to know every Google device user who had a phone in certain parts of the Upper East Side at certain times. And rather than doing what we normally do with a search warrant, where we say, this is the person, I want their information, they reversed it. And they put it on Google to provide the identities of the people who are in that neighborhood.
That's Albert Fox Cahn of the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project. I encourage you to listen to the full interview. It's available for all my subscribers today at peterbcollins.com, at iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, and Stitcher. And if you're not a subscriber, you can hear it for just $1. That's what earns you a 24-hour pass here. And I do believe that this is a very serious issue. And as I point out in the interview, there are all these gray areas now where the law has not kept up with technology advances and the aggressive use of technology by law enforcement. And it's about time we address that. Over at The Intercept, they revealed another troubling violation of constitutional standards. There are DEA agents who troll Amtrak trains. They don't carry search warrants. They just look at people. Some of them they have advance information on from the manifests that they get from the rail agency. But they focus on a guy named Jay Perry, who's a mid-50s DEA agent. And he patrols the rails and sometimes Greyhound buses. And he uses a tactic which is questionable. It is called the cold search. And he basically asks people if he can search them, and most people say yes. They think they don't have a choice. And, of course, we don't know the actual language that he uses when he flashes a badge and says, "Let me look in your bag." But in addition to catching actual criminal suspects who are mules with cocaine, he and his colleagues have used the civil asset seizure rules to take cash from people who don't get arrested or prosecuted for drug trafficking. And this use of the civil asset seizure process is something that was exposed during the Obama administration. They attempted to use policies to restrict it. And according to this article, the DEA has stopped paying bounties to Amtrak employees for tipping them off about possible drug suspects. And they identify one secretary who worked at Amtrak who was paid something like $830,000 for a series of tips that he or she provided to the DEA. And those were just a percentage of the cash that was grabbed from these suspects or innocent parties who felt they had no choice but to hand over the cash they were carrying. Well, the gun violence in this country continues unabated. It is numbing. Saturday, I flipped on the TV because I wanted to get news about what was going on in Hong Kong, maybe an update on the hurricane. And that's when the report of an active shooter in Odessa, Midland, Texas, first came on the air. At the end of this massacre, 7 people left dead, more than 22 injured. One was a postal worker who had a vehicle hijacked. And this now just kind of blends in with the ugly, bloody background noise that is America in 2019. And candidate Beto O'Rourke, running for president on the Democratic side, has not restrained his language. On live television, he said, "This is really fucked up." And I'll bet there are more people offended by his language than by what he was addressing. Then we learned this morning that in Alabama, a 14-year-old boy in Elkmont called the cops, and after his convoluted story fell apart, he confessed that he had killed his father, stepmother, and 3 siblings. And thoughts and prayers, of course, are circulating in massive quantities. Congress reconvenes today. Democrats are talking tough about how they're just going to push through some gun control legislation. And Trump, of course, takes a different position every day. And so far, the only real change is a modest move by Walmart to discontinue the sale of handgun ammunition and publicly request that their customers, their members, refrain from openly carrying firearms in stores even where state law allows it. Now, Walmart is a major purveyor of guns and ammo in this country. I have some stats here. Let me find them for you. About 20% of the market share for ammunition is controlled by Walmart today. About half of its more than 4,000 U.S. stores sell firearms, and many of them are in rural areas, and it's fairly popular there. Walmart has taken the step of urging more debate on the reauthorization of an assault weapons ban, but that's about as far as they've gone into the policy area. And I woke up yesterday morning to tragic news. I'm a scuba diver, and I have spent the night in the harbor at Santa Cruz Island. It's off the coast of California, closer to Santa Barbara than Los Angeles. Santa Cruz is one of the 5 Channel Islands, and it's a favorite for divers, lots of caves and interesting underwater sights. And the dive boat suffered an explosion. The crew has some explaining to do. All 5 of them got off the boat alive, and it appears nobody else did. They have identified, or at least found, 25 bodies of the total 34 who were on the ship's manifest. Meanwhile, in a surprising move, the Trump administration has walked back its most cruel and inexplicable immigration changes. Last week, they sent deportation notices to thousands of people across the country who have serious chronic illnesses, many of whom would die if they were shipped out of the United States, often to a homeland where they have never lived. And fortunately, the Trump administration says it will reconsider. Well, I hope that is a total rescission of that cruel and indefensible announcement last week. And in the reversal of another egregious incident, they have issued a student visa and allowed Ismail Ajawi, the Palestinian student who was deported from Logan Airport in Boston last week after immigration officials scanned his phone and his computer and objected to posts on Facebook that had been made by his friends that were critical of, we don't know exactly what, whether it was Trump or just the U.S. in general. Well, reconsideration there led to the issuance of a student visa at the embassy in Beirut, and Ajawi arrived in the United States yesterday and is on campus for the first day of his career at Harvard University. And in total vindication of the case of Jose Inez Garcia Zarate, an appeals court here in California has overturned the final element of the misguided trial that he went through after the accidental killing of Kate Steinle on the San Francisco waterfront in 2015. This case drew demagoguery from Trump, even from local officials. Mayor Ed Lee, who has since passed away, demagogued the issue, blaming the liberal sheriff for the release of Zarate. But fundamentally, the jury believed the public defenders, and I've linked to my exclusive interview with Matt Gonzalez and Francisco Ugarte, who defended Zarate, won the acquittal, and now have won the final element because he was found guilty of being a felon in possession of a firearm. But the jury clearly ruled on behalf of the defense that Zarate was never in possession of the weapon. He reached under a chair where he says it was wrapped in a T-shirt, and he picked it up, it went off, and then he threw it in the bay. Was that possession? Well, the appeals court ruled that the judge made a mistake by not instructing the jury about the possible defense of momentary possession. And there is court history and precedent around that. And so I am relieved that this demagogued case that originated here in San Francisco is now a closed case. Zarate has been held ever since, and he is likely to be deported. And that could happen in the next few weeks. So on Friday, Trump went on Twitter, and he appeared to be tweaking the nation of Iran, which had suffered an accident or an incident where a missile blew up at one of its locations in Iran. He ended his tweet with this taunt, "I wish Iran best wishes and good luck in determining what happened in this fiery accident." But he also included a high-resolution image of the disaster. Now, I want to be clear. Any president, including this idiot, under law has the right to declassify information without any paperwork. All they have to do is release it. And a president is within his or her rights to do that. But intelligence officials say that this tips off the probable location of the drone that was overflying the Imam Khomeini Space Center in Semnan province and captured a very high-resolution image of the crash or the incident scene. And it just shows how reckless he is, and his Twitter habit is something that needs to be curtailed. And over the weekend, he canceled a state visit to Poland, The Polish authorities had rolled out the red carpet and set up reviewing stands. They were going to do a big military parade, and they offered him some concessions of new missile locations in their nation. He said, nah, I got to stay here because we've got this hurricane that's bearing down on my property at Mar-a-Lago. Now, Dorian has shifted course, and Mar-a-Lago appears to be well outside of its range. But despite his claim that he was going to, be on duty for the American people through the Labor Day weekend, he played golf twice, and he tweeted 122 times. Some of it was about the weather. He inaccurately told people in Alabama they should be worried about Hurricane Dorian, and the National Weather Service said, we repeat, no impacts from Hurricane Dorian will be felt across Alabama. And so he attacked some of his, favorite targets and wove in some misinformation. He said he'd never heard of a Category 5 hurricane, but there have been two while he was president, Maria and Irma. And, of course, Katrina was a Category 5. But, every day is full of surprises for an ignorant guy like Trump. Now, speaking of the president and his Twitter habit, if you're a regular listener, you've heard me talk about how Twitter needs to impose and actually carry out enforcement of its alleged community standards. On almost a daily basis, we hear of somebody who's been bounced from Twitter. I don't even know this guy's name, but Max Blumenthal was deploring that a right-wing guy who is anti-war was bounced for life from Twitter because he suggested that Sean Hannity is retarded. Now, Trump can question the loyalty of members of Congress, say that they hate Jews and hate Israel without any evidence, and Twitter doesn't do a goddamn thing. So today, over at whowhatwhy.org, you can find a fresh Radio Who, What, Why podcast hosted by yours truly and featuring Mark Carlin, the editor of BuzzFlash, who posted an article similar to my thoughts that Twitter needs to enforce its standards. And we were joined by Russ Baker, the editor-in-chief of Who, What, Why. I think you'll find it a great conversation. Here's an excerpt. This time it's Russ Baker. Elon Musk has been instructed by the Securities and Exchange Commission. This is the founder of Tesla and the Boring Company and the other interests that he has. He has been told that he has to vet his tweets that could cause any movement in Tesla stock before he actually pushes send. So do we need adult supervision for Trump before he takes to Twitter?
Well, it's interesting that we have those rules and regulations for the fundamental mechanisms of capitalism, if you consider that to be Wall Street, but we don't have it for the way in which someone like Trump can also affect the markets and everything else, which he's doing as well. I mean, that would be another point, would be to ask them about the comments that he makes and how they affect shares, because they do. And by the way, of course, the other thing he does, which I think is absolutely brilliant, is he deliberately throws these things out right when we ought to be paying attention to something like the economy. Yeah. And the media eats it up and turns in that direction. So, yeah, I think there ought to be a lot more pressure on Twitter to acknowledge the power and the impact and the role that it plays, and that it ought to start moving in the direction, at least step by step, to hold them accountable. Absolutely.
The podcast featuring Russ Baker and Mark Carlin is available today at whowhatwhy.org. And by the way, there has been, you could even say, excessive coverage of Hurricane Dorian, with apologies to the people in the Bahamas who've paid quite a price as the storm hovered over those islands for quite a long time. But there's also massive flooding in the Great Lakes. Lake Michigan has overflowed its banks in both Michigan and Illinois. Lake Huron, Lake Erie have been spilling raw sewage. And this is attributed to climate change. Here is Richard Rood, professor at the University of Michigan's Department of Climate and Space Sciences. Bigger picture, it's climate change. There's no doubt that we're in a region where climate change is having an impact. Every day I pause for a moment to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And today I want to tell you a little story about one of my loyal, longtime listeners, supporters, and subscribers. Now, you may have heard on Friday, I released a podcast interview with Leslie Lakes. She runs an organization called PATH, and they promote and support the artwork that is created by people who happen to be in prison. And in the interview that I released, it's a video interview from our local TV job here, Leslie Lakes tells us, near the end of the interview, about the discovery she made of the Alcatraz East Crime Museum, which is in Tennessee, the town of Pigeon Forge, which is 35 miles or so outside of Knoxville. And in the podcast on Friday, I gently suggested that Joe Carson, who is that longtime listener and supporter, I know he lives near Knoxville, and I said, hey, Joe, why don't you check it out? Well, he didn't wait. He heard the podcast on Friday or maybe Saturday, and by Sunday, he was there visiting the museum and looking at the exhibit that Leslie Lakes and her organization, PATH, have put on in this distant location, certainly distant from San Francisco. So I just have to tell you how gratifying that is for me, to know that I can spread the word about something that is a passion of mine. And one of my listeners picks up on it and acts so quickly. And you can imagine Leslie Lakes was really tickled. By the way, if you want to become a subscriber, I think you know what to do. Visit peterbcollins.com, click on menu, then click on Become a Subscriber. You'll hit the sign-up page, and I appreciate whatever commitment you decide to make. Well, here we have the optics of corruption. Mike Pence, the toady vice president, had plans to go to Ireland and to Great Britain. He's Irish. He was going to go back to the family sod. And because Trump canceled his trip to Poland, he has shuffled the deck for Mike Pence's trip overseas at taxpayer expense with his wife, his mom, and his sister. So they were planning to go to Doonbeg, which is where the Pence family hails from, apparently. And apparently when Trump found out they were going to Ireland, he made the suggestion that they all stay at the Trump International Golf Links and Hotel Doonbeg, sorry. And the White House interprets that as a suggestion, not a command. Pence says he's going to pay his own expenses there, but when you think of the Secret Service, the traveling media, it's just another windfall for a Trump business. This is corruption. Clear and simple. And they are shameless and brazen as they pull it off every damn day. Now, one of the meetings that Pence has is with Boris Johnson, who may tell him to go away because I'm too busy. So today, the final vote that gave the conservatives a majority in Parliament defected. Now, anybody could have done it, but Philip Lee, who is a critic of Boris Johnson's, quit the party, marched across the House of Commons to stand with the Liberals. And that means that Boris Johnson no longer has a working majority in Parliament. He is still trying to browbeat the Parliament into accepting his very brief schedule for their meetings, which will limit their ability to influence the Brexit, what do we call it, the trajectory of Brexit, heading up to the current deadline of October 31. So this gets complicated, particularly for Americans who don't understand the British system, and I'm one of those. So the clash, as Parliament returned from its summer recess, has been made possible by a faction of lawmakers in Johnson's own party who've said they won't support a no-deal Brexit, threatening to defy Johnson's warning that the rebels will be expelled from the party if they pursue the parliamentary effort. Now, he is saying that by Parliament agreeing not to meet, that the European Parliament at the European Union will address the demands of Boris Johnson to modify the Brexit agreement that was negotiated by Theresa May, and that the EU has 3 times said they will not renegotiate. And so everybody is boxed in. And I don't know who's going to punch out and break through But it's going to be a bloody mess. And I pity the people of Britain who will pay quite a price. In Hong Kong over the weekend, the protests continued despite the ban that was issued on Friday and the arrest of, 28 or 30 of the alleged leaders of the protests. And when you listen to the language and when you look at the TV pictures, the pictures show greater violence by the protesters. We see them hurling Molotov cocktails in some of the photos. It's fair to say that the vast majority of the protesters are nonviolent and appear to be dedicated to expanding some form of democracy in Hong Kong. But the violence that's shown up in photos now enables the leaders of Hong Kong and their backers in Beijing to use the word terror. Quote, the extent of violence, danger, and destruction have reached very serious conditions. Radical people have escalated their violent and illegal acts, showing elements of terror. And the U.S. has led the way in using the code word terror as an excuse to do almost anything. You can shock and awe. You can starve a nation. You can move to destabilize it or change its leadership. All that is authorized when the word terror is injected in the rhetoric. And so Hong Kong's embattled leader, Carrie Lam, is pushing back. Over the weekend, somebody leaked a recording, an audio recording that was obtained by Reuters. In it, the chief executive of Hong Kong, who is simply a puppet for Beijing, can be heard saying that she was very, very limited in how her government could respond to the mass protests that started back in June. And this is the quote that is proffered by Reuters. For a chief executive to have caused this huge havoc to Hong Kong is unforgivable. If I have a choice, the first thing I would do is to quit, having made a deep apology. So today, she held a news conference. She didn't deny the accuracy of the audio, but she said, I have never tendered resignation to the Central People's Government. I have not even contemplated tendering resignation. The choice of not resigning is my own choice. The reason being I believe I can lead my team to come out of this impasse. Not sure I believe that. Now, Reuters reported earlier this month that Beijing had refused a proposal to de-escalate the crisis, ordering Lam not to concede to any demands, even more politically palatable ones like the formal withdrawal of the extradition bill that triggered this whole wave, and a police investigation. And today, riot police patrolled the city as protesters vowed to come out again. Students continued a class boycott that started yesterday. In a video posted online, police were seen chasing secondary school students and tackling one to the ground. And I have to say there was much more news that I had to leave on the table in the other room today. There's just a lot to report on, and I'll try to weave it in over the next few days. But as I wrap up, I want to encourage you to read a series of articles and watch a video. I think you'll find it fascinating. The origin of this is my friend Pepe Escobar, the globe-trotting reporter of Brazilian heritage who rarely spends time in his native country. It's too corrupt, and he just can't handle the frustration. But he made a rare trip back to Brazil to get an exclusive prison interview with former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. In the first report that Escobar posted, they talked about the Amazon. In the second report that is up on the homepage today at consortiumnews.com, fascinating stories about the creation of the BRICS alliance when Lula was president. BRICS stood for Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And yes, they were intent on creating a currency that was an alternative to the dollar. And this alliance seriously troubled the United States, and I can't prove that Obama ordered covert operations that led to the impeachment of legitimate President Dilma Rousseff, who succeeded Lula and was part of his People's Party. I don't know the actual Brazilian name of the party. And so I encourage you to read this. And also, they have posted an interview with Pepe Escobar that Joe Lauria did that was part of CN Live on Friday. I joined the show a little after Pepe had appeared. But what we learn is the infighting. And when Lula and other world leaders gathered in, I think it was in Copenhagen in 2009, that was the climate conference. And remember, Obama flew in and burned up a lot of carbon as he parachuted in at the last minute for the meeting. And Lula tells this story that he was meeting with Brazil, China, India, Russia, and they were trying to come up with a strategy. And Hillary Clinton tried to bust into the meeting, Secretary of State Hillary. But the Chinese wouldn't let her in. So a few minutes later, Obama shows up. And initially the Chinese didn't let him in. But then they did let him in. He sat down next to Lula. And Lula says that there was tremendous pressure on him from all the other countries, the Western countries, to declare that China was the biggest polluter in the world. And he refused to do that and pointed out that the history of pollution, starting with the Industrial Revolution, is one that the established countries have to address. So I find it fascinating. I hope you will check it out. It's available over at consortiumnews.com. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You'll find it on YouTube. You're invited to share it all over the damn place. And I'm still Peter B. Collins. Sing along now.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.